Hey everybody, Professor Gould here. We're going to talk about angular motion today. So let's dive right into it with flexion and extension. So for these terms, think about starting in anatomic position. For when you flex a joint, you are going to decrease the angle between the two bones involved in that joint. So flexing the elbow, we're going to decrease the angle between the humerus and the radius and the ulna. When we flex the wrists, we're going to decrease the angle between the radius and ulna and the hand bones, like that, okay? The opposite of flexion, of course, is extension. And extension is returning the body part to anatomic position. If we go past anatomic position, that is considered hyperextension, okay? So we have flexion, extension. We can hyperextend our wrists. Some people can hyperextend the elbows. I can't. We can flex the hips at the thigh. Okay. We can flex the knee. Yeah, we can flex the ankle. We'll come back to that because that's special. And then putting the foot back, putting the thigh back, that's extension of the hip. We can hyperextend the hip back behind, okay? We can flex the knee and we can extend the knee, okay? And then straightening the knee joint, that's extension, okay? Now, we don't usually talk about hyperextension. We usually just say we're extending, okay? So if you're extending your wrists, for example, when they are pronated, you can extend them. We can just say you're extending them up, even though technically this is hyperextension. Notice that flexion and extension is happening in a very specific plane. Okay, flexion of the shoulders is coming forward. Okay, flexion of the elbow, bending the elbow. But of course, your shoulder can do lots of different kinds of motion, and those different kinds of motions have different names. So, I can't make that go. All right, for this. Now, will you go? All right. For the foot, like I said, we have special words for movement of the foot. Dorsiflexion is flexing the foot toward the dorsal side. Remember, that's the back side. So think of yourself as a quadruped. Dorsiflexion is what we call flexing the foot. Pointing the foot is plantar flexion. We're flexing the foot toward the plantar side, the sole of our foot, okay? So plantar flexion, dorsiflexion of the ankle. Does that make sense? Now, the trunk and the neck can be laterally flexed. Okay, so you can bend sideways, this way and this way. That's lateral flexion. Oh, it was so good. Laterally flex the neck. Seriously. You feel like you're stressed out? Flex your neck. A couple of times each side. Oh, so good. Circumduction is a kind of motion where the appendage makes a circle, the end of the appendage makes a circle, and if you were to draw a line, as you can see on our slide, the path of the appendage would make a cone, okay? So we can circumduct legs, we can circumduct arms, you can circumduct wrists. This is good when you've been looking at the computer or playing on your phone for a while. You can actually circumduct the head. And I recommend doing that if you're stressed out. If you've just been sitting at a desk for a long time, it really helps to loosen up the neck. You can circumduct your fingers, especially the thumb. Most of your fingers can do it, okay? And we'll talk about the shape of the joints in another section and how that enables you to do those things. Now, adduction and abduction are two forms of movement that are really simple, but people get them confused sometimes. Adduction, think adding things together. Okay, adduction brings limbs toward the midline So when we're talking about the arms or the legs, abduction brings the limbs toward the midline of the body. If we're talking about the hands, adduction brings the fingers toward the midline of the hands. Okay? You can adduct your eyes by crossing your eyes and looking at your nose. That's adducting, bringing toward the midline. Abduction is taking something away from the midline. So you can abduct your arms, you can abduct your legs. Most people cannot abduct their eyes. If you could, I mean, you can abduct one, but the other one adducts. You can abduct your fingers, yeah, bringing them away from the midline of the hand. You can adduct and abduct your toes a little bit, although we don't have quite as much control as we have over our fingers. Notice that when we abduct, we are staying on the plane of anatomic position, okay? So we can abduct and adduct. When we flex fingers or thumb, I need a darker background, there we go. We bring them forward, okay? So flexing the fingers at this metacarpophalangeal joint is bringing them forward like that. Flexing the interphalangeal joints between the phalanges like that. Okay? Flex the thumb, there we go. Does that make sense? Okay, now rotation. Your neck can rotate. And that's because of that atlantoaxial joint between vertebrae number 1 and 2, cervical vertebrae 1 and 2, yeah. The appendages can rotate either medially toward the midline or laterally away from the midline, okay? So we can do medial and lateral rotation. We can also do medial and lateral rotation with the legs, and if we put them together, then we can do both hands moves. You can also rotate your trunk of the body, but obviously that's not a medial or a lateral rotation. It's rotating around the axis of the body, okay? So arms and legs can do medial and lateral rotation. Trunk and neck can just do rotation. Is that distinction? Okay, now pay attention to the difference between the rotation of the whole arm, which rotates the humerus in the glenoid cavity, and rotation of the forearm from supination to pronation. And you can do two separate things. Oops, this one. There we go. All right. Depression and elevation. Depression is taking something down. Elevation is lifting something up. So you can depress your shoulders and elevate your shoulders. Go ahead and do that with me. Elevate your shoulders. Okay, hold them up there. Hold them up as high, as close to your ears as you can, and then drop them down. Feel how that lessens some of the stress in your shoulders. Do that before you sit down to take a test. That's good. Okay, you can elevate the mandible and depress the mandible. You can, we elevate the shoulders. You can also elevate a bunch of things on the face, and the muscles that do that are called levators. We take the E off, levator. So we have a levator palpebrae superioris that raises the upper eyelids. We have levator labii superioris that raises the upper lip. Protraction and retraction. Protraction is taking something forward. Remember, pro means forward or ahead. So protraction, pushing something forward, look really cute when you do with your chin. Retraction, pull something back. You can protract your mandible. Mandible has all kinds of cool. You can also protract and retract your head as a whole. Okay? Now, you've been sitting and reading textbooks for a long time, and you've been playing with your phone on your breaks. Your neck gets tired, and it tends to start to curve forward. To preserve that correct cervical curve and to strengthen these muscles on the back of your neck, concentrate on retracting your whole head, not just your chin, and not extending the neck like this. Keep the neck straight, keep the head straight, and pull the chin back. retraction. And then extend and retract and extend and retract. That's going to focus on these little muscles on the back of your neck and actually help to strengthen the back of your neck and offset the strengthening of the muscles on the front of the neck that we get from doing this. All right. Okay, we can also retract the shoulders and protract the shoulders. Yeah. Okay. We can protract the rib cage, retract the rib cage. Now, with the hands and the feet, Bobby says it's not a foot. With the hands and feet, we can put the thumb and pinky in opposition to each other. So the thumb can oppose. Notice it's coming across the palm. The pinky can oppose by coming across the palm. When we oppose the thumb, it does also flex at that interphalangeal joint in the middle, okay? But this motion across the palm, that's opposition. This motion forward, that is flexion of the metacarpophalangeal joint of the thumb or the pollex. When we pull the thumb out like that, that's abduction. And then if we do all of those things together, we can circumduct. So we can do opposition and then reposition, putting things back where they belong in anatomic position. All right, we talked about pronation and supination before. Supination, palms are up, radius and ulna are parallel to each other. Pronation, palms are down, radius is crossed over the ulna. Sorry. We can also pronate and supinate the feet to a small extent, not as much as we can with the hands. But if we pick up our foot, we can supinate by bringing the sole of the foot toward the midline. This is called inversion as well as supination. And then pronation is eversion, or pushing the sole of the foot away from the midline. Okay, so inversion, eversion. In and E are referring to the where the sole is, the plantar side of the foot is facing. So inversion and eversion. There we go, okay. Or supination and pronation of the foot. So if you've ever heard of somebody who overpronates their foot, they tend to walk on the insides of their foot. More common is over supinating, where you walk on the outsides of your feet. All right, so we'll stop that there and come back and talk about naming joints in the next segment.